Hello everyone. Welcome to our APQC KM Capability Assessment Tool orientation session. First, I'm going to share with you some background and history about our assessment tool, and then I will follow up with some tips and techniques for completing it. So let's get started. APQC's Levels of Knowledge Management Maturity Model was developed 10 years ago in collaboration with a group of advanced KM practitioners who wanted a way to assess the maturity of their organization's KM programs. The levels of the maturity model progress from level 1, initiate, to level 5, innovate. And there are a series of capabilities and characteristics that support each maturity level. APQC's KM Capability Assessment Tool assesses your organization's KM capabilities against these 5 levels of KM maturity. I'm often asked why a KM team should go through the trouble of assessing its organization's KM capabilities. And I respond that there are several benefits. First, it provides a baseline of the current state of your organization's KM capabilities. It's a snapshot in time, so you'll know where you start, where you're starting from, and what path you should take to go forward. Second, it can help you develop a business case for investment. Third, it can be used as a strategic decision-making framework that can help you determine where to invest resources in your program. It also enables you to benchmark with KM programs at other organizations, and it can help you build an explicit plan to move forward from one level of maturity to the next. The KM Capability Assessment Tool assesses any KM program across 4 categories and 12 capabilities, shown here on slide number 4. There are a total of 146 capability statements in the assessment tool itself, and each is designed to help you determine the strengths and opportunities of your program. So enough with the overview and background. Let's talk about completing the assessment. After 10 years of conducting these assessments, APQC has learned a thing or two about the best way to do so, so we want to share some of those tips and techniques with you today. First, you need to determine the scope of your assessment. Are you completing the assessment for the entire enterprise, or are you completing it on behalf of a specific business unit or division within your organization, such as the research and development unit, or perhaps marketing and sales? Or are you completing the assessment on behalf of a specific domain of knowledge, perhaps around a specific product or a process, a business process that is critical to your company? Second, you need to determine who will provide input to the assessment. Will you gather this input only from the KM core team, or will you invite input from KM advocates who might be embedded in a business unit or division, or even from individuals who might be power users of your communities and or other KM approaches, processes, and systems in your organization? And third, you need to hold an internal meeting to collect the information and examples that will be required to complete the assessment. Your responses to items number 1 and 2 will help inform number 3, who should be a part of this meeting. As for those internal meetings, we have a few tips for those as well. First, we'd like to recommend that you provide participants a copy of APQC's KM Capability Assessment Tool prior to your meeting. Now, we're not suggesting that everybody has to complete the KM Capability Assessment Tool individually, far from that. But we would suggest that you encourage them to review the different categories and capabilities and the supporting capability assessments within the tool to bring their ideas and thoughts and examples to this discussion. We also encourage you to remember to evaluate the capability statements from the entity's perspective. Remember on the previous slide when I said you have to determine the scope. Are you completing this assessment on behalf of the enterprise, or perhaps on behalf of a specific business unit or division or domain of knowledge? Well, that's the entity that we're referring to here. So if you are completing the assessment, for example, on behalf of your research and development function inside your organization, then all of your responses should be through the lens of the R&D function or division in your organization. And finally, we encourage you to capture your participants' comments related to the issues and examples that would be useful for APQC to address during validation. And here are a few more tips to help you with the completion of the assessment. One of the ones I'd like to highlight here is the second bullet on slide number 8, which states that your responses must indicate tangible evidence of demonstrated capability for that statement. Basically, what we're looking for here are examples of what this looks like inside, what this behavior, this activity looks like inside your organization. So, for example, if the capability statement suggests that or states that a KM value proposition has been identified and documented for your organization, we're not just looking for a yes or a no there. If you indicate that yes, one has been identified, we're actually looking for what that value proposition is. Share the details with us. The more you share with us, the easier the validation, and the more likely it is that you'll get full credit for the information provided. We also want to encourage you to begin the assessment from the bottom of each subcategory, starting with level 1 and work your way up to level 5, and indicate only statements for which evidence can be provided. In other words, only put the check mark or the X mark next to the statement where you have supporting examples. And please include at least one example that demonstrates achievement of that capability statement. Also, please remember that we're not familiar with your acronyms. So if you could help us out by spelling out those acronyms or provide us with a list, that would be extremely helpful as well. As you're completing the KM capability assessment, you will be required to provide some demographic information. And this information can be found on the Terms and Conditions tab and on the Demographics tab inside the KM capability assessment tool. Once you agree to the terms and conditions, we ask that you provide us with some simple contact information and some additional information such as the annual revenue or budget for the evaluated business entity, the scope, remember we already talked about that, and the number of employees for that entity, for the scope that you checked out. The more information and more complete information that you can provide for us on the Demographics tab will better enable us to generate some peer cuts of the data in your report. You'll understand what I mean by that in just a moment. This is a screenshot of the first of the 12 KM capabilities in our KM capability assessment tool. This one happens to be for objectives. And I'd like to point out some relevant items here. First, you'll notice that there are several tabs across the bottom here. These tabs represent the 12 different capabilities in the assessment tool. So you've got objectives, business case, budget, resources, and so on. Second, we recommend that for each capability, you start at level 1 and work your way up to level 5. Respond as completely as possible. Place an X next to each capability statement that your organization has accomplished and provide one or more supporting examples. While only one example column is shown here in this screenshot, there are actually 5 available to use in the actual assessment tool. So feel free to provide up to 5 examples if you have them. Third, remember earlier when I said that you have to complete a level before you can be considered for the next level? Here's what I mean. In order to be considered a level 1, you must place X's by both statements at level 1 and provide sufficient supporting examples for both of those statements. If those examples meet the capability statements at level 1, you will receive credit for them. To be considered level 2, you must complete all of level 1 and check off all of the statements at level 2 and provide supporting examples for level 1 and level 2. If you skip one statement at level 2, you will default back down to level 1. For those of you familiar with the Baldrige assessment, it's very similar in terms of how we award credit. And it progresses similarly. In other words, to achieve level 3 maturity, you must have checked off all the statements at level 1, level 2, and level 3 with sufficient supporting documentation or examples. Okay, so once you've completed the assessment, here's your next step. We ask that you submit your completed workbook to the email address provided here, kmcat@apqc.org, and please copy your APQC account manager if you know who that is. Once we receive your completed workbook, we will initiate the validation process, and we'll follow up with you if we need any additional information or clarification on any of your comments. Once you've responded to our clarifying comments or questions and make your changes to your responses as needed, please return your updated workbook to the KMCAT project manager. Your final report will then be returned to you, and a meeting will be scheduled to discuss the results with one of APQC's knowledge management subject matter experts. Your report will include charts similar to the example shown here. This chart shows your organization compared to all participants, such as the top performers by industry, top performers by region, and top performers by revenue. Now you know why we wanted you to include all that information on the demographics tab, because it informs these charts and data points right here. And there will be other charts that break out and look at each capability specifically as well. In addition to the summary charts, your report will also include data showing how your organization compared to others in your industry, revenue range, region, etc. All of which is blinded according to APQC's benchmarking code of conduct. This is why it's so important, again, for you to complete that demographics tab, because that's what will enable us to inform your report with the appropriate data. Thank you very much for joining us today for this orientation session. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact us at kmcat@apqc.org or via the phone numbers provided here. Thank you all very much.